All right. Well, happy Father's Day to all the dads. And if you haven't called your dad today, you need to do so and let him know. Happy Father's Day. And so I just wanted to give you guys a dietary nutritional fact sheet of one cool dad. And this would be it. Dad jokes are 100% positive and a very cool dad. Brandon and I are about as cool as they get when it comes to dad jokes. We're like the backside of your pillow. Unconditional love, great advice. Fixing stuff, there's about 80% in a cool dad that he can fix stuff, and he makes up for the rest of that with 20% of farts, but you didn't know that. But being a father is one of the greatest, frustrating, joy-filled things you could ever do. And in Genesis 1:27, one of my all-time favorite verses, because I think it encompasses so much in our lives and our daily walk and the way we deal with each other, is it says that God says that He's created us in His own image, and that His attributes are seen in His creation, including fathers. And God, we remember from last week with Michelle, is not the reflection of our fathers, but God is the perfection of fatherhood. Now, we also heard last week from Michelle that God is not a male, He's not a man, but He is spirit. So we remember that we worship God, we worship Him in spirit and in truth. Now, God has endowed us men with His likeness to raise offspring, the children that He puts in our lives, our children, kids, ankle biters, rug rats, the fruit of your loins that call you dad, and the reason that made this day applicable for us. But have you ever wondered why we celebrate and recognize our fathers? And it actually, you're not going to believe this, maybe you will, it actually started with Mother's Day, Civil War, and retailers. According to the History Channel, this is what it says. Mother's Day became a commercial day in 1908 when Anna Jarvis, daughter of Anne Reeves Jarvis, wanted to honor her mother by making a national holiday. See, her mother during the 1860s was urging people to come together to celebrate Mother's Work Day. And so they did that in West Virginia, and what it was it brought together Confederate and Union soldiers, and the mothers worked together. That was the very first recorded Mother's Day. So she wanted to honor her mother in this way. So she's going around saying, hey, how do we honor this Mother's Day thing? And so John Wanamaker department store in Philadelphia was the first one to hold the celebration for Anna's mother, Anne. So they see this, right? This one retail store does this. Other retailers, you're not going to believe it, seeing how much money could be made, thought, yeah, let's jump in and do this Mother's Day thing. And then President Woodrow Wilson in 1914, he decided to declare it the second Sunday in May as the day that we would honor nationally that tender, gentle army, the mothers of America. It's what the President Woodrow Wilson thought of our mothers. But today's about fathers. So how did that happen? Well, to be honest, the national movement for Father's Day didn't go as easily. As one florist explained, fathers haven't the same sentimental appeal that mothers have. Apparently, we 80% fix things and the other 20% we fart, so we don't have the same sentimental appeal. On July 5th of 1908, a Western Virginia church sponsored the nation's first event explicitly to honor fathers. And this was a sermon in memory of 362 men who had died in the previous December in an explosion in the coal company there in Monaco. But it was a one-time deal, and that was it. And the next year in Spokane, Washington, a woman named Sonora Smart Dodd, she was one child of 6 who had been raised by a widower, their father. She tried to establish this official day equivalent to Mother's Day for male parents. And so she goes around to local churches, the YMCA, shopkeepers, government officials to try to drum up some support for this idea. And she was successful. So Washington State celebrated the nation's first statewide Father's Day on June 19th, 1910. I thought that was funny because here we are 112 years later. It's June 19th all over again. I did math. Someone make sure Michelle knows that I did it and did it well. I'd appreciate that. So slowly, this holiday spread. And in 1916, President Wilson honored the day by using telegraph signals to unfurl a flag in Spokane when he pressed a button in Washington, D.C. That might be the first recorded maybe internet service or Bluetooth device, right? He pushed a button in Washington and Spokane, the flag unfurled. And it was in 1924, President Calvin Coolidge urged the state governments to observe Father's Day. And so today, the day honoring fathers is celebrated in the United States on the third Sunday of June. And you know, it was clear until 1972, in the middle of a hard-fought presidential re-election, that Richard Nixon, remember that guy? He signed a proclamation making Father's Day a federal holiday at last. Now, I get all the nuances of why Father's Day didn't take off as easily, you know, why men scoff at it, and why many probably still do today. But aside from all that, there's been a move throughout our last probably 50, 60 years to quietly degenerate the image of men and manhood. We noticed it first on television. Remember, like if you've ever watched the old shows like Leave It to Beaver, you know, father was this well-dressed guy who sat in a chair, read his paper, and when the beaver was doing something foolish, he'd say, "Now, Beaver," and he'd give him some kind of deep intellectual advice to keep him on the straight and narrow. And then years later, we started having shows with the depiction of dad as some kind of dope, right? Some kind of dope. You know, the Homer Simpsons, this guy, he's just not smart enough to do anything but watch gauges. And now we hear groups saying masculinity is toxic. Groups that say we don't need men, we don't need fathers. And we see how programs, even in government, while well-meaning and unintentionally exclude fathers from the home. And we find out as we look through a lot of the research that comes out that as the presence of fathers in the home decline, crime and ailments of society continue to rise. Now, I don't want to lose you. I don't want to get a confusing message or a mixed message or sound like I'm saying something I'm not. I'm not saying that single motherhood is the root of all evil, that single moms can't provide healthy environments, because we know that's not true. We have plenty examples of that. One is brain surgeon, political hopeful Ben Carson, if you've ever heard of him, raised in poverty by a single mom who encouraged him to read books, press forward among a whole list of other things. And he did that like his mother urged him to do, and he became a renowned brain surgeon, highly recognized for his advancements he brought to the area of brain surgery. However, the research into the idea that single-parent homes could produce more crime dates back to the early 19th century. Officials at a New York State's Auburn Penitentiary, in an attempt to discern the causes of crimes, they would study the biographies of incarcerated men. And then they would report to the legislature in 1829 and 1830, suggested that the family deintegration resulting from maybe death, desertion, or divorce of parents led to undisciplined children, who eventually became criminals. And now, well over a century later, researchers continue to examine the family background of unique populations, and they reach similar conclusions. But my point is this: fathers, you are important. You are needed. You need to be celebrated. Your children and your wives, they need to say thank you. They need to see you representing fatherhood and masculinity correctly and honoring you for that. And if you're not a father in the home for whatever reason, still make that presence known. Still be engaged positively with the children and with their mother. Sometimes fatherhood plays out differently, right? I mean, I'm not obtuse to this idea that sometimes the father's a hard man. You just can't deal with him, and something happens in that relationship. And so a stepdad comes into the picture, and perhaps he's the one that all the kids refer to as dad. But fathers are important in whatever fashion. Now we remember that God is not the reflection of our fathers. In fact, our hope is that the reflection of God is seen in us as fathers. But it's that God is the perfection of fatherhood. And Jesus tells us when we pray to refer to him as Father, to give us an idea of how to see him and how to approach him. Another idea I want to touch on is this idea of masculinity. Masculinity is not being a tough guy who fights everyone, who says something sideways to them, says something crazy to their girl, or says something bad about their mama. However, I do still laugh at a good yo mama joke. I can't help it. I digress. But being a protector is not being a fighter. And this is something maybe our younger men need to catch on to. It's not that you fight. That's not being a protector. A protector is a man who honors a woman for her dignity, for her uniqueness and accomplishments. Young men protect her virginity. We don't talk about this anymore. But let me be real for a moment. Don't ask for nudes in a text. A few years ago, I learned, speaking with a youth worker, that teens today don't view sexting as an issue. But it is. It really, really is. You're degrading a woman when you ask for that and you do that. You're turning her into something, nothing more than like an image to be used. Women need to be shown that masculinity is a man who shows a woman her true worth, her true value. And men, we want to create an environment where our wives and our kids feel safe, not only from the outside marauder, the guy getting ready to hop over the fence and rob us, the outside forces, but safe from you. When I was young, I remember as a child, my dad would become aggravated and frustrated, and he would explode, and he'd hit something or he'd throw something when he got angry. I mean, never one of us, just it was always things, right? And when I became a young adult, I mimicked this behavior. And it was when Michelle pointed out that there was something scary about that attitude and it didn't make her feel safe, that I had to start thinking about what was going on, and I had to do some soul searching. And I had to work on that attitude. And really, that whole idea, we could unpack that for a long time about how you work on that one. And that's probably something that would be best done over a cup of coffee, over a fire pit, and over a while. But God gives us some great places to start in his word. In Colossians, he says, "Fathers, do not embitter your children or they will become discouraged." I had never really heard growing up the words, "I love you" from my dad. Not that I remember. In the mid-90s, I went to this Promise Keeper stuff. And, they had it out at Arrowhead Football Stadium, and there'd be all these men and these speakers and preachers. And I remember this one year in particular, I left to that thinking, you know what? I'm going to intentionally, purposely tell my dad, "I love you." And I had to think about how I was going to do this because I wasn't real sure. But I remember the first time I did it, we're talking on the phone, and because we talked quite a bit. When we get to the end of the conversation, I just go, "Dad, I love you." And he said, "All right, son, talk to you later." I remember one time as a child saying to him, "Love you." And it was this. And so maybe that's what my whole anxiety was over, because I remember saying, "Do you love me, or you just feel like you have to?" But I turned back and I know Dad loved me, but I needed to hear it as a kid, right? And even as a young adult, I needed to hear it. Every time we talked, every time I'd see him, I'd do it again and again. "Dad, I love you." I don't know how many times I did it, but one day he just said, "I love you too, son." And I mean, oh my gosh, this works, right? And it just became a thing. And it even became a thing to the point he would beat me to it sometimes. Like we'd start to part ways and he'd go, "Well, son, I love you." I go, "Dad, I love you too." And I started working in hugs in the middle of it too. I thought, well, hey, I'm going to go for another one and steal me a hug while I'm at it. He became my best friend, and I loved him so much. And after hearing the stories from my mom and his brothers about their father, about my granddad, I get it. He had never been shown or heard about love by his dad. Love to Grandpa was that he provided a roof and food, and he did his duty. But fatherhood is so much more than completing a task, completing a duty, doing a job. Discipline for him was beating the kids with the border switch every time they got out of line. So my dad, I look back and realized he was as best as he could, with no real role model to look at, breaking a generational curse with us kids, with us 4 kids. Which honestly, I think back, Dad spanked us once. We were being like absolutely terrible at church or something. And I remember he lined all 4 of us up in the living room and he took turns and we all got our butt paddled. And so before he died, we were joking about it. And I said, you remember that time you spanked us all? I think I said whipped us. You remember that time you whipped us all for talking in church? And he just hung his head down low. And I thought, oh, he's going to ask for my forgiveness. He says, it sure broke my heart to paddle your sister. But I look back and I realized he did the best he could with what he knew to break a generational curse. And so now it was my turn to take it a step further as a father. So now my son, my 6'4", jolly green giant looking kid, he will not leave until he says, I love you. Sometimes repeatedly. Sometimes I'll hear his mom say, yes, son, you told me. But I'll take more of it. We love it. She goes, I love it that my son's almost 25 and still wants to hug me and love on me. And I'm like, yeah, me too. It's crazy. My friend Joe Clausen, he's a pastor of a church in Leavenworth. He goes out of his way to make sure that people in his life know how much he loves them. And he does it so much so that his 4-year-old last night at dinner, she's eating her hamburger telling us, this is a good hamburger. And then she just looks around, she goes, I love you all. Now that's a worthwhile legacy to leave with your kids, that you've taught them how to express love to other people, meaningful, and to make meaningful relationships. So men, I would say our kids are watching us. Will they hear, I love you? Will they see forgiveness? Will they get instruction? I sometimes will hear kids cuss at their parents, and then the parents will get upset about it. And I'm like, yeah, but that's what I heard come out of your mouth at that kid all day. What did we expect? So fathers, let's make hearing, I love you, normal. Proverbs says that a man's discretion makes him slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook a transgression. Perhaps anger is a generational curse you need to break like I did. My dad, as he grew older, became one of the most forgiving people I knew. In fact, he would forgive a person in his heart and in his mind before that person even realized they had wronged him, or even if they perhaps ever did. In fact, seeing him work in that type of grace used to anger me. I'd say, Dad, stop it. Stop letting those people walk all over you. And I realized that sometimes being Jesus to others is doing things that looks like someone's walking all over you. I mean, what if the world became a place full of masculine men who were protective of women and honored them, were slow to anger and quick to forgive? What would we look like? Proverbs tells us that it's better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city. In my career, I've had some fights, as you can imagine. Sometimes I've been in those fights and in the middle of them, and I thought, man, there is no way out of this. The cavalry's not getting here soon enough. What are we going to do? This is really turning ugly. And I can remember being at a point where I'm screaming, don't do this to the other person. Don't do this. Don't make me do this. That's not a fun place to be, and it's a scary place to be. Some fights are unavoidable. But however, as you get older, you start learning how to be more patient with people. And you start to learn that the more you can do that, you'll avoid a lot of headaches, especially as your body doesn't heal or bounce back as quickly. Being patient and self-control and having self-control will win the day almost every time. I mean, yeah, I could muscle my way through a lot of challenges in life, but what if I take a moment, step back, and listen? Not only will I win the fight, but maybe I even make the other guy feel like he won too. Maybe a generational curse is addiction. You're going to definitely need some self-control to battle an addiction, whatever that might look like. And you'll possibly even need some help. One of the other things we need to do is we need to understand and realize as men that it's perfectly fine to be masculine and ask for help. Masculinity is not always pulling yourself up by the bootstraps by yourself. You know, the elitist fighting teams in the military are not lone wolves. They're men who know what their strengths and their weaknesses are, and they're able to rely on other men in their team to get the objective done. Sometimes, guys, we have to seek counseling. I know I've shared with you before when I had to do that after the loss of our second child. Sometimes we need someone who can help us out with our weaknesses so that we can be strong and break that generational curse. Now, I'm going to give you a freebie here. If you want to make fun of me later, I don't care. It's fine. I got a thick skin. I'll hear some older guys sometimes laugh at guys who cry at something that's truly heartbreaking. Well, I'm going to tell you, when my dad died, and I keep bringing him up, but it is Father's Day, I bawled my eyeballs out. Maybe not like trying to help mom through it or take care of chores or do stuff at her house, but alone, usually sitting, and I'd cry out to God, and I just bawled my eyes out for like weeks. And a few years later, every once in a while. And you know what? That's okay. Grieve when you need to grieve, because it'll help you move on faster. I know this man, and he's never really grieved the loss of his dad. And I remember, because his dad was close to me, and not being able to grieve that loss sent him deeper into addiction. It made him unable to hold down his job, and it made him distant from his loved ones. Things as fathers we don't want to have happen. So we need to understand that it's okay to grieve. Now, none of that makes me less of a man. I'll build stuff, I'll remodel, I'll shoot a gun, shoot a bow, run a chainsaw, I'll throw an axe. And the Bible says it this way: there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. Fathers, it's time for us to live like the men God created us to be. And the Bible's full of instructions on how to live, love, raise kids, and deal with each other. We talked about that in Proverbs a few weeks ago. It's a great place to look for direction and guidance. I mean, let's be men who pray in front of our kids, pray over our kids. Let's teach them to pray. One thing I'll say about my father-in-law, Tuffy, the man would pray in front of his kids, and he would pray over his kids in front of his kids. And his prayers were never really elaborate. In fact, his dinner prayer was usually, God, thanks for the food, and we would eat. And if you prayed longer than that, he would tell you, pray to God on your own time, I'm hungry. But he prayed in front of them and for them, over them. We need to make that normal. So tonight, we celebrate fathers who always figured it out. The fathers who found a way to survive and to thrive and taught us to do the same. It's their resilience that reminds us of what we are capable of. Today, we're celebrating fathers who are learning to say, I love you more often. The fathers whose actions spoke louder than the words they didn't know we needed to hear. Today we celebrate the fathers who choose to take us in and support us as their own. Today we celebrate fathers who aren't here with us anymore. The ones we wish we could hug just one more time, just to make sure they know how much we truly love them. What time is it for you today? What generational curse, whether you're a father or a mother or a person just with an earshot, what generational curse do you need to lay down at the foot of the cross? Seek forgiveness for and move away from. Well, let me pray for you guys. God, we thank you for fathers. We thank you for the way you established fathers and mothers, and you show us both of them in your likeness, how you created us to create family and unity and to raise our kids. And whatever space our fathers are in tonight, whether it's a father in the home or a father away, that we learn to be godly fathers, that we learn to be fathers who would put you first in our lives, that we would be fathers who seek to emulate your love, your grace, and your forgiveness in our children's lives, that will teach them not only to hear the words, I love you, but how to properly love others and how to treat another man's daughter appropriately and right. I thank you for this great group of friends as we get to hang out tonight. And God, as we decide to eat some hamburgers and hot dogs and just enjoy each other's fellowship and community, we just ask you to bless that food and bless this community and bless this time together in our conversation. We love you, and it's in Jesus' name we pray.